From Nordic gods to Christiania, to kings, staves, and medieval fortresses, Oslo has so much to be curious about. Bli med. Remember when you were a child and all you asked was why? Well, I never quite outgrew that whole quest for knowledge phase. In fact, I've made a career out of asking who, what, where, why, and how as an arts and travel journalist for the past 20 years. So, if I have an insatiable curiosity about the exciting, inspiring, beautiful world of art, architecture, and hidden history all around us, I bet you do too. This isn't your typical what to do on a vacation travel show. Oh no, this is your all-access pass to a deeper understanding of the world's great art and architecture, people and places, history, and how did they do that. So, come along on our educational journey, our field trip for grown-ups who have never quite grown up, and learn on Curious Traveler. Curious Traveler is made possible by the following.
Europe is a treasure trove of fascinating history, rich culture, and renowned cities. Ama Waterways River Cruises offers a way to see all this wonder in person. You can discover more at amawaterways.com.
Towering fjords, Nordic culture, Scandinavian heritage, the Northern Lights. So many ways to experience Scandinavia. Adventures begin at firebirdtours.com. Blue Ribbon Bags, baggage protection made simple. We track and return your delayed baggage around the world. We send automatic email updates so you can do what you love. BlueRibbonBags.com. Anatomy, European travel clothing for women. Anatomy is designed to fly. Anatomy.com.
It's hard to believe with this modern bustling city today, but up until 994 AD, this area was ruled by Vikings. Then in 1397, Denmark ruled over the region. It wasn't until 1905 that Norway became a sovereign nation. But what does Oslo's history have to do with all that? That is what we're about to be curious about. Who were the Vikings, and why did their ships look like this? And what kind of Nordic mythology did they believe in? What is a stave church, and why does it look like a Viking ship? Is that grass on the roof? And people on this roof? Who is this guy I keep stepping on? And what's this guy screaming about? Why does this theater look so royal? And how does the Norwegian royal family go from this castle to this palace? And what does Elsa have to do with it? Why? So much to be curious about here in Oslo. Oslo is the capital and the largest city of Norway. Set against the backdrop of those famous Scandinavian fjords, Oslo is full of curious history. But from the early 1600s until the early 1900s, you couldn't find Oslo anywhere on a map. All over Oslo, you'll see these great signs everywhere that say Christiania. Is that because they love Christmas around here? No, that's because Oslo used to be named Christiania. And it's all because of King Christian IV, who in 1624 stood on this very spot, pointed down and said, "Hey, nice place. I think I'll take it and name it after myself." And Christiania was born. And before Christiania, the original site for Oslo was near the Aker River, which the Akershus Fortress is named after, which inspired the castle in Disney's Frozen, but we'll let it go for now, and get to all of that later. Oslo's history, of course, you want to look up and around you, but every once in a while, you want to look down too and figure out the mystery. Who is this guy? All over Oslo, including the sidewalks, you will see a guy holding a millstone in one hand and 3 arrows in the other, surrounded by stars and lions. And is that a female figure lounging beneath his feet? This is Saint Halvard, the patron saint of Oslo. So the story goes, back in 1043, he rescued a pregnant slave. Unfortunately, they were both killed with 3 arrows and then a millstone tied around his neck. Because he floated to the surface, even with this heavy weight, he was considered a martyr, and to this day is the patron saint of Oslo because of his bravery and his defense of the weak. And this city seal has been used by Oslo since the early Middle Ages.
Wow!
And while we're here at City Hall, let's look around inside, where we will see more paintings dedicated to Saint Halvard, and even more huge, glorious murals depicting Norway's history. Oh, and one more teeny tiny thing to note about Oslo City Hall. Every December 10th, on the anniversary of a guy named Alfred's death, a little thing called the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony is held right here. But why the Peace Prize ceremony is held here while the rest of the Nobel Prize ceremonies are held in Alfred Nobel's home country of Sweden remains a bit of a curiosity. Next, from keeping the peace to stirring up trouble, we seriously shift gears now and go back in Norway's history to visit the Vikings. Ah, those legendary Vikings, pillaging and plundering, sailing and conquering, and eating giant turkey legs. Well, some of those legends aren't quite true, like they didn't actually have horns on their helmets. But here's what we do know. There's lots of theories about where the name Viking came from, such as creek or bay, or to camp, or to turn, or even pirate.
Yarr!
All of these words describe what the Vikings were doing, moving across the waters and setting up camp in new lands, even if those lands were already occupied. Vikings were definitely seafaring warriors and explorers who raided and colonized areas of Europe from about the 8th to the 11th century. But why?
I think it was a need to be, in some senses. It was a warrior society, and to get honor, and you need honor to get the right wife. You need to go out and raid. You need to get enough money. You need to prove yourself. And also, some say that we didn't have enough space. That's not true.
The Vikings sailed mostly westward to conquer the British Isles, France, Iceland, and Greenland. All this sailing required some seriously seaworthy and superior ships, and ones designed specifically for their travels.
The thing with the Vikings is that they combined two ship technologies. So it's the really shallow boat with the mast, so that they could travel on sea, but also in rivers and fjords.
And to lead the way, Vikings had a whole slew of Nordic gods and goddesses to guide them. Those warrior Vikings had all kinds of wonderful, fantastical creatures in their Norse mythology. In fact, on the back and the front of the ship, you can see all of these great dragons and serpents and sea creatures. And in fact, all the way to the top, you can see a serpent circling around on itself. Historians say a lot of times these creatures were used to scare off the enemy, and I have to say that serpent up there is doing its job.
They had a lot of gods and different creatures. If you read the literature from the mythology, you hear about all of these dwarfs and the wolf, the Fenris wolf. Everybody's heard about Loki,
right.
And Thor, of course, but they're not like the Christian God, the Almighty, in that sense. And they believed that they could communicate with them, but they also had then priestesses and priests that could communicate.
Which brings us to the latest theory about who was buried in this Viking ship, the Oseberg Longship. When the ship was excavated in 1904, among the buried they found a woman dressed in expensive fabrics. So historians believe she may have been a priestess to the cult of Frøya, who was a Nordic goddess of war, fertility, and knowledge. And here's the best part. Most of us are familiar with Odin, who ruled over Valhalla, but did you know that Frøya had her own kingdom called Folkvang? And I like to believe that the cool warriors went to hang out with Frøya in the afterlife. From Frøya to Fairhair, we come back down to earth to trace the connection from the Viking rulers to the Norwegian kings. We start with Viking chief Harald Fairhair. No blonde jokes here, please. Who becomes the first Norwegian king. Then his son, Håkon I, succeeded him, and he was known as Håkon the Good. Then comes a couple of Olafs, including Saint Olaf, the patron saint of Norway, and finally, a Magnus. And here's where it gets really cool. These Viking and royal names are still used for today's royal family.
Wow!
We'll explore the Norwegian monarchy more in just a minute. First, we have one more Viking curiosity to ponder. Did the Vikings continue their journey westward from Greenland and really discover America centuries before Columbus?
So far, the evidence we have is one settlement. They have recently seen with satellite images some structures that might be from Viking settlements. We do not know, and we have very little archaeological material that suggests that they were in the States. They probably were there before Columbus.
I like that theory. I choose to believe that they were.
I think so too.
The Viking Age ended sometime in the 11th century, and Norway's conversion from Norse paganism to Christianity happened around the year 1000. So we get a bit of an overlap in religions here, which produced a unique and beautiful form of architecture. This is the Gulstave Church, built around 1200 AD. It's one of only 30 left in all of Norway. What's a stave church, and why does it look so different than other churches built in Europe around the same time period? Well, here's what happened. Norwegians traveled throughout Europe and were inspired by these gorgeous stone churches they were seeing, but they had never built in stone themselves. So instead, they came home and used the materials they were used to, wood. But instead of building a church like their log homes, where the logs are stacked horizontally, they turn those logs on its end and use them vertically, and that is called a stave. Two other very interesting features to see here. You see how the little rooftops are in a little triangle with a little cross on top? That was inspired, again, by what they saw throughout the rest of Europe, but way at the top, you see these kind of gargoyle dragon figures. Well, that is a nod to their Nordic heritage and, of course, that wonderful Nordic mythology. You can see the Nordic interpretation of the Gothic gargoyles here. Don't they look like those mythological creatures on the bow of Viking ships?
Ah.
Up at the top, they have these wonderful little, are they wooden gargoyles, much like the stone church and the churches in the rest of Europe?
Yeah, well, here you see ornamentation which is in between Christianity and Old Norse religions. So it's Christianity was pretty new when this church was built, so of course they also used dragons and floral motifs.
So we've got a combination of pagan religions and Christianity, all in one house of worship. As a Christian church, there are crosses on the rooftops outside and colorful paintings of the saints inside from the 17th century. And there's also some curious inscriptions dating back much further than that.
We found runic inscriptions on some of the staves, showing that, well, this church is more than 1,000 years old.
Wow. So where are these runic inscriptions?
Here you can see drawings and runic inscriptions. These are made at the time of the building of the church. So these small drawings here are more than 1,000 years old.
Now, our next bit of important Norwegian architecture may not have the secret inscriptions to decipher, but it does include goats and trolls. There's another type of building important to Norwegian history, and it's a big one. Is this a house for ogres? Actually, it's just a farmer's house from the 1700s. But why is it so supersized?
Everything in Norway was oriented much more against the local community more than the political state and the king. That stands as most of the rest of Europe. So many farmers owned their own land, and they were, in a way, able to build huge houses.
And on top of this massive house, instead of a tile or tin roof, can you see the unique material? Here's a hint. It's a rather tasty one if you're a goat. Here's one of my favorite bits of Norwegian history. This house you see behind me kind of looks like there's grass growing on the roof, right? Well, that's because there is. In fact, all the way back into the Iron Age through the early 20th century, believe it or not, grass roofs were all over Norway. And here's the reason why. Well, it's pretty cheap material, as in free. It also provided great insulation for the house. Sure, an occasional goat or two might wander up there, but that's just part of the charm. And I happen to think it looks like a precious little fairy tale hobbit cottage. or the setting for a fairy tale about those legendary Norwegian trolls. An important part of Norwegian folklore, trolls were known for being monstrous, magical, and hairy tricksters, hiding out in the forest and haunting and kidnapping after dark. In fact, if they were ever even exposed to sunlight, they would turn into stone or burst. So what exactly was this troll exposed to? Next, from goats grazing on the roof to humans walking on the roof, we fast forward a couple of centuries to a permanent iceberg off the coast of Oslo. The Oslo Opera House is the modern icon of the city. It's only been here since 2008, but it's already recognized around the world. Now, of course, as you might imagine, it won several design and architecture awards, and its shape is meant to mimic an iceberg rising from the sea. There's all kinds of curious and unique features here, not the least of which, it's probably the only place in the world where they actually encourage you to walk on the rooftop. Rising from the Oslo fjord like an artsy iceberg, the Oslo Opera House is a center for the arts that is its own work of art. The architects intentionally integrated the natural beauty of the fjord into the cityscape of Oslo's old Bjørvika, creating a new public space where people become part of the art. And the art continues inside with the undulating oak wood wall, and this sparkly wall simply titled The Other Wall. Inside the lobby, you'll see these massive white walls with diamond shapes in a green glow from below. They were done by the famous Danish-Icelandic artist Olafur Eliasson. And if you look really closely, you can figure out what it's supposed to symbolize. Figured it out yet? It's melting ice. The Oslo Opera House isn't the only bit of glorious architecture producing glorious music and performances in Oslo. About a century earlier, Oslo's National Theatre opened its doors in 1899. And just inside the front door, you are greeted by those legendary Valkyries. Here in the entryway, all kinds of curious artwork to be seen. All around you, you will see these wonderful little Valkyries, of course, protecting gods and man. But up here, you may miss it. It's this tiny little bird. Well, that is a wonderful homage to Ibsen. That's a lark representing Nora from A Doll's House. Ibsen, you say? Yes, legendary playwright Henrik Ibsen is pretty important around here. Perhaps the most famous playwright in Norwegian history. He is known for A Doll's House, Hedda Gabler, and Peer Gynt. His works were pretty controversial, basically telling it like it is in a time when people didn't.
Indeed.
And being a true Norwegian, Ibsen just had to include some trolls in some of his plays as symbols of destructive instincts. Of his many accolades, Ibsen is known as the father of realism. He was awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of St. Olaf, and he had some pretty sweet mutton chops, am I right? And the National Theatre is considered the home for his plays.
He had become very famous, so of course it helped a lot having Ibsen still there, advocating for building this theatre. So he's meant a tremendous lot to this theatre. And we feel that this is his theatre, and we're taking good care of him.
Next, why was the home for Ibsen's plays built in the first place? It is so regal, it is so ornate, and it's a spectacle in and of its own, even before you see the play or the musical up on the stage. Why was this style used?
It's taking a place in the Western world, in the Western tradition, becoming a part of Europe.
It was Oslo's and Norway's statement that, we are a center of culture, we are a center of the arts. From themes of realism to themes of seriously freaking out.
Yikes!
We go now from the National Theatre to the National Gallery. The National Gallery was founded in 1837 and houses the largest collection of paintings, drawings, and sculptures in all of Norway. Now, as in any art museum, you're supposed to keep your voice down. So why is someone constantly screaming in here? Because of Norway's legendary artist, Edvard Munch. Munch was known for exploring these wonderful psychological themes. His most famous work, of course, The Scream in 1893. The Scream has been interpreted as expressing the universal anxiety of man. Munch said about his work that he had achieved his goal as the study of the soul and the study of himself. Okay, so this dude had some serious issues going on. Yikes! Munch said he was inspired to paint The Scream after going on a stroll with two friends and seeing a blood-red sunset, which led to a hallucination where he felt and heard, quote, a scream throughout nature. And this anxiety is something we can all relate to, whether the anxiety is raised to this cosmic level or you just can't find your car keys and you're late for work. There's lots of theories on the meaning and elements of the scream, so here are just a curious few. These two figures could be the friends who left him on the walk, causing the panic attack.
Yikes!
And that iconic oblong face? Well, some art historians say it could have been inspired by a Peruvian mummy from the famous 1889 World Expo in Paris. Sheesh, why couldn't Munch have been inspired by something pretty at the expo? Like, I don't know, the Eiffel Tower? But of course, The Scream isn't the only work of art here at the National Gallery. There is an entire section devoted to just, you guessed it, trolls. It is called the Fairy Tale Room, and it is devoted to the art of Norwegian fairy tale illustration. The trolls aren't so scary in here. Hi, little guy. From fairy tale trolls to fairy tale kingdoms, our next curious spot is an Oslo castle fit for a couple of frozen Disney princesses. Brrr. In the 1300s, Akershus Castle was built for King Haakon V. In the 15 and 1600s, King Christian IV did an extreme makeover and turned it into a Renaissance castle. In 2013, Disney got inspired by the castle and used it as the model for Elsa's castle in Frozen. Lucky Elsa. And of course, it was also the real home to the real King of Norway in the Middle Ages. Which brings us to the Norwegian monarchy, which dates back more than 1,000 years, back to our friends, those Vikings. Remember old Harald Fairhair, the Viking chief turned first Norwegian king? Well, he was the one who united Norway around 885. Since then, there have been more than 60 named sovereigns, including today's current royal family, who, instead of living in Akershus Castle, live here in the beautiful royal palace. I'm just gonna guess Akershus would be a little drafty. The royal palace was built between 1824 and 1849 in the beautiful neoclassical style. It has 173 rooms, and it has been the main residence of the royal family ever since 1905, when Norway got its independence from Sweden. So, much has changed since old King Fairhair. Today, Norway is a constitutional monarchy, with the royals highly revered as they carry on the grand tradition of 1,000+ years of the Norwegian monarchy.
Well, it's quite a responsibility, and it's something I see as a very meaningful task, and it's a great privilege to be able to continue the line and continue to work with the same foundation of values that my forefathers have sort of set the grounds for.
So, from a Viking chief to a royal lineage lasting more than 1,000 years, to grass on the roof, to walking on the roof, to a sunset-inspiring scream heard around the world. To peaceful prizes given to peaceful world leaders. From fierce Viking ships and Nordic gods to a town called Christiania, with stave churches built once Christianity spread through. which gave us St. Halvard on the sidewalks and St. Olaf awarded to great playwrights, who performed controversial plays here with a special entrance for royals who used to live here but now live here, and sprinkled through with legendary trolls around every corner. Oslo has so much to be curious about. Thank you for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, and how of Oslo. As they say here in Norway, ha det bra! Curious Traveler is made possible by the following.
Europe is a treasure trove of fascinating history, rich culture, and renowned cities. Ama Waterways River Cruises offers a way to see all this wonder in person. You can discover more at amawaterways.com.
Towering fjords, Nordic culture, Scandinavian heritage, the Northern Lights. So many ways to experience Scandinavia. Adventures begin at firebirdtours.com. Blue ribbon bags, baggage protection made simple. We track and return your delayed baggage around the world. We send automatic email updates so you can do what you love. BlueRibbonBags.com. Anatomy, European travel clothing for women. Anatomy is designed to fly. Anatomy.com.
Still curious? Go to CuriousTravelerTV.com and follow us on Facebook at Curious Traveler TV, on Twitter at Curious Trav TV, and on Instagram at Curious Traveler TV.